Hey everyone, this is Blended. We are super excited to introduce our first ever episode.
Yay.
Yes, we've been working really hard to get this out. My name is Christian.
And I'm Laura.
And Laura's going to take it away for us.
All right, so today we're going to talk about a topic that we had on our heart, navigating stressful life events. If you Google some of the top most stressful life events, things like death of a spouse, divorce, financial stressors, loss of jobs, moving, selling homes, building homes, that kind of thing.
Getting married, having children. Adopting children.
Yes. Those are the things that pop up on the top 10 list. And we just began talking about, I think we said we've gone through 6 of them, maybe
in about a year and a half.
Yes. And we're still sane and healthy and whole and have a ton of peace. We just kind of wanted to talk about how we navigated those things. Yeah.
So I'll start off. I know for me, when I began to kind of think about this, and we were really you ever just have those days where you're just sitting and you kind of just feel kind of like, man, why is life going to get easier? And you just feel kind of overwhelmed by your circumstance. You kind of feel like everything that could go wrong did go wrong, or you're just like wanting to just get into a routine where things are easy. Mm-hmm. And I think we were sitting down one day and we were just like, man, and we kind of begin to reflect, which is, I think, an important thing to do from time to time. And we begin to realize like how many things we had walked together, and even what we had walked through before we were even married, some of the heavy things that we had to navigate, and we're still navigating, of course, and how far we've come through that. And so for me, one of the big things that was kind of a really big life stressor is my late wife before was battling cancer and passed away. That was a really heavy thing for me to walk through. You kind of feel like your life gets reset, in almost every way.
I was going to say, like, we realized you find yourself in a place where you never thought you would be. You're walking through things you never wanted to happen.
Yeah, but you're forced to. Like, there's no other option.
Choice.
That's where you're at, and what do you do now?
Right.
And that next step just feels impossible. Mm-hmm. And of course, I allowed myself to grieve. I think that was the hardest thing for me, is how do I express grief that felt so overwhelming? One of the guys that I talked to one time about grief that really helped me walk through a lot of different things, he said, it feels like you have a swimming pool worth of emotions that's getting funneled through a straw, and your straw is your brain. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what it feels like. I have a swimming pool worth of grief above my head, and I can only process a straw's amount of liquid at a time. Mm. And it just felt so crazy. And I was like raising my daughter by myself at that time. She was 3.
Life is still happening. You still have a job.
Life is still going. I still have a job. I'm still trying to figure out, like,
pay bills.
Do I have a vision for my job? Am I even able to get through a day? And so walking through that was hard, but one of the things I quickly realized is I don't have a choice in the matter. My life is moving forward, and I have to find a way to be at peace with it. Mm-hmm. And that may sound impossible in that kind of situation, but I found myself realizing I have to get there. And so the first thing I realized is I have to be aware. And I'm like, what does that mean? I mean, I know where I'm at. I know I've lost everything in that moment. I know I have to figure out how to move forward, but what is awareness going to get me? I already know I'm grieving, but I needed to be aware of when I was grieving, what I needed to grieve, and then how can I begin to feel better and work towards some sort of future for my life. And that was really the turning point for me, because I think for a few months, I know for a few months, you can ask my family or anyone that knew me, I was not in the greatest state of mind. I was probably battling thoughts of depression. Mm-hmm. I don't think I allowed it to overtake me, but I definitely wasn't my normal self in any way. But one thing that I begin to do is try to find a way to happiness again, how to find a way to be there. Really, most importantly, and probably the largest driving factor, and you could probably agree to this in your own situation, is for your children.
Right.
For my daughter, I don't want her to see her father being tore apart and not really understand because she was little. I wanted to be the best dad I could in that. So how did I have to be happy to do that. I can't be a sad dad and be a good dad. Constantly anyways.
Yeah.
I had moments of grief for sure, but so I learned how to become aware and what I needed. And a lot of that was just simply taking time for myself to allow myself to process. For me, I'm a musician. I played music. I wrote songs. That was a very huge expression for me that began to allow for a lot of things to come out.
While you're talking, I'm thinking, so I went through a divorce and I grieved. And that's even like early on what we talked about, like it was a lot of grief. But when you talk about awareness, I spent 4 years before I met you figuring out what do I need. So I guess I did do that. While you were talking, I was like, did I do that? Did I have awareness? Yeah. I spent a lot of time figuring out what do I need to be at peace and to feel sane, to be a good mom. That was the driving factor. I have 4 children. Yes, I'm grieving. Everything I dreamt of is falling apart, but I have to be a mom. I have to provide. I have to take care of them. So how do I do that? So I guess we had the same thought process. How do I do that and function as a good mom to really be present for them the way they need? But then when we got together, your grief didn't go away. My grief didn't go away. In fact, I think some of it for me, I don't know if for you, but mine, some of it surfaced more than it had in my alone season through our marriage. And I went through like waves of grief that I thought I had already dealt with, but they were surfacing like in our first year.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree. It was probably different in its own way for me. We were different people, but I would definitely agree. I think there was definitely times where I would hit these low moments and not really know what was going on.
Yeah.
And then I would get alone for a second and begin to process like,
That's
oh,
it.
geez, this is just grief. Like,
Yeah.
and why is it hitting me this way? You know?
Yes. Same. You pushed me to spend time alone, like get in a room by myself and shut the door when you're in those moments of like, what is going on? Why do I feel so out of control, really, in my emotions, kind of drowning? But because you're moving and going and doing and working and taking care of the kids, like it almost takes another person to see that you need that. But then did you ever feel guilty taking time for yourself to be still and like tune into that? Because I did.
I know you did. And I had to basically force you at times.
To like go shut the door. I've got this.
It depends on the situation for me. I think for me, right before we got married, I had already walked a good bit of habits of dealing with grief that I kind of developed some patterns that were kind of normal for me.
Yeah.
Where you had a longer stint and also had, 4 boys you were raising alone. So you had also them to care to. I just had 1 daughter, which was still, for me, like, I don't even know how you did that, right? So I had these moments where like nighttime I would think or process, or on my way to work and the silent car ride I would process emotion, or it would get away in my studio and like could like think and process or write music and let an expression out. So I'd already kind of developed some patterns. So for me, it wasn't really a selfish thing. It was like, I have to do this. Like I don't really have the choice. I can't carry this around all day or for 3 weeks. Like I know I start to check out. I start to be less present. I start to I'm in my head, you're dealing with emotion and it's in your head and you just don't know, like you got to deal with it. And so for me, it's not selfish. It's like, I'm selfish if I stay here.
Yeah.
Cause now I'm like, I'm not a good husband. I'm not a good father. I have to deal with this if I'm actually wanting to be, doing something. So for me, it was just a different perspective.
I think too, for me, while you're talking, I'm realizing this, I did it alone. I knew when I was by myself, for one thing, I had a lot more alone time. I didn't have someone in my bedroom, in my bathroom. So I was, even though I had 4 kids, I had time in my bedroom, my bathroom alone. So I could process things. But then going into a marriage, I felt like I didn't have as much alone time, but also felt like you needed me and the kids needed me. So it took, and maybe this thought process of thinking, oh, I've already dealt with that. So what is going on? Like, why is this stuff surfacing? But a lot of it was things that could only surface when you're in a relationship. Like, those are like triggers that can only get pushed on, or things that can come to the surface when you open up your heart again and you're in a relationship. So then
that vulnerability. Yeah.
When I would get still and sit in a room, most of the time it was just like losing it, weeping, crying. And it was a release. And maybe I would like journal or read or listen to music or something, but most of it was just releasing emotion. And then I felt like I could breathe again.
Yeah. I've often thought it's something that weighs you down. The grief does, the pain, the emotion. Mm-hmm. And when you begin to kind of like express it in a way or release some things, it's like you're losing that weight. Like that was holding you down, and you feel freedom. You kind of feel like you were kind of chained down with something, and now that's gone, and you're like, oh, man, that's good. Like I can actually feel happy now when I wasn't able to earlier.
And be present and think and function. And like, I think for somebody that's listening to this that is wondering, like, how do you know when you're at that point where you have to do something to deal with it? Like, I would get really short.
Yeah. And there's a lot of telltale signs for sure.
Yeah. Like snapping at things that wouldn't normally make me snap, or frustrated with needs of the kids that normally are not overwhelming. Yeah. Being overwhelmed by stuff that really shouldn't overwhelm me.
So I've attributed a lot of that. I've seen it in you, and I've seen it in me. I'm not even going to act like I'm above any of this. I've definitely dealt with it in different ways. But the way I could probably best describe that would be, it's this underlining fear that something's wrong. And one book that I never read, but someone told me about, that's the best way to read a book, is through other people's experiences. No, but in all seriousness, the book talked about, it was dealing with grief and really anything that are like a fear. And the best way, it gave an analogy of a lion in like a field or somewhere where it's somewhere near, it's dark out. And everyone, when they hear lions roar and you're in the, say you're in Africa and you hear a lion, well, your natural instinct is to run from that sound.
Yes.
Well, this is the one situation where that's wrong.
Yeah.
Most people, though, when things feel fearful or feel scary or anything overwhelming, you run, you shove it down, you get distractions, whatever you can, because I don't want to deal with that lion inside of me, because it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt real bad, because it's going to hurt me. But the truth is you actually have to teach your mind to do the other thing and actually run toward what you're afraid of, what you're most scared of, what the pain that will cause, because freedom's on the other end of that pain. So in your day-to-day, that frustration, that shortness, that's all that fear building of what's inside, and you're choosing to run from it instead of embrace it and actually run toward it.
Yeah. All right, so in talking about life stressors, all right, those were some of the extremely heavy ones.
Yeah.
On top of those, navigating those, we sold 2 homes. Your house, my house.
Yeah, I sold my house. We were renting your house. We lived there for a short period of time. Well, I think 6 months or so, while we were building a new house, which is also another stressor.
It's on the list,
Yeah, try to build a house while selling a house, and then moving into a small house, and then trying to get out of the rent agreement of that house so we could move into our new house. And the way it lined up was we had to actually trust that our house was going to finish in time. And if anyone's ever built a house, getting a contractor to commit to an actual date
Well, we were also at the tail end of COVID, so
which, yeah,
timing was
also,
a wreck. Yeah.
that's another life stressor that's on the list, but it's really far down because it's not common. But like a world event, meaning like COVID
Right.
or like a war or something like really drastic, can be a huge life stressor. That was actually on the list, but you got to scroll further down because it's not a common problem, especially in America. But COVID was a
Right.
life stressor for everyone.
Right.
And getting supplies for our house, like we had to like believe for God, so many things because that was
Windows,
delaying.
doors, yeah.
And we had to just agree to like lose this rental house potentially and have almost a plan B for like, we don't know where we're going to live
With 5 children.
with 5 children if this house doesn't finish. So there was so many stressful things in that season of just like walking through all that.
Simultaneously, we knew
And we got married like, what was that?
July.
I think 3 months before we moved into the
We got
new house we were
engaged,
building.
And then we got married in August, yeah.
Yeah. So we did a lot of really wild things very quickly.
We moved into our home and I laid down a full-time job that I had for 5 years.
Yep.
You transitioned
Yeah, out of my job.
a 7-year job.
That I wasn't sure where I was going either. It just felt like the season change was coming and God was kind of speaking to me to kind of like, trust him in this. And I did, but I also had no idea. And we were at that point getting engaged. I was building a house, selling a house, all at that same time. I mean, when we got back from the honeymoon, 2 days after I got back from our wedding honeymoon, I sold my house. Like I went to the closing. So like when I tell you like everything happened on top of one another, it was never ending.
And then we adopted each other's children.
Yep. Which was it took about a 9-month process after we got married.
Yeah.
Roughly something like that.
Yeah. Anything else? That's
I'm sure there's
enough
other things, but we had a son graduate
Yeah.
and decide where he was going to be going and if he was
Yeah.
going to do school or
Yeah.
just work. And then he moved out and found great roommates, but like that was also like a really heavy
Yes.
season. That was right after the adoption.
Yes.
So, it's almost like every time we thought we were all right, we made it.
Yeah.
We made
New
it.
routine.
Yep.
We made it through the hard.
Yep.
It was constant.
Yep. And,
Then you took on a new job.
yep.
We got direction in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, we just feel like we haven't had a moment where like, when are we going to get a normal week, normal month, a normal 3 months, where we could say, we could wake up at this time or do this thing. Like we both don't like to live moment to moment, and
We love routine.
we love routine, we love planning, and we felt like we've been shoved into seasons of constant transitions that are last minute, that are kind of like you don't have a lot of time. You don't really get to do everything you would normally want to do and sit down and plan. You just have to do it. And being sane through all that has been a constant battle to deal with the emotions, and then just even finding rest and peace in it.
Right. And navigating, our own hearts, and then you've got to navigate your children's hearts.
Yeah.
And how do they feel in all of this change? How are they adjusting to a new school or a new house or all of it?
Yeah.
So how did we do that? Because we had a lot of peace.
We did. And
It was hard, but we had a lot of peace.
Yeah, and I will say that about the whole process. We definitely had a ton of peace throughout everything that we did. It was nothing like we were forced into something or like we did it out of fear. We actually knew this was the right decision every single time.
Right.
That
we were in
didn't
agreement.
Yeah, we were in agreement, but none of that made it any easier to walk through.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
still, we had peace about that we were supposed to do these things. It was just, how do we now handle it? And we honestly didn't have the answers. It wasn't like we were like prepared and it's like, oh, let's go.
But what do you think some things we did? I can tell you a couple things that I wish we would have done. Like, I wish I would have given myself more grace.
Yeah. I mean, that's an obvious one for sure. I think we were really hard on ourselves
Yes.
to be at a place where we wanted to be.
Right.
And we were so dissatisfied with the seasons we were in because of what we wanted
Yeah.
that we didn't probably
Just say
have the
like,
best attitudes in those
yeah,
times.
this is a lot and it's okay if it's not perfect.
Yeah.
All right. But clearly there were some things we did right. What do you think the keys? I could think of one key that we both had. We had really good people around us.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. I think family, friends that were really encouraging, that were there for us, that helped.
Yeah.
That's definitely, I mean, especially if you're maybe moved to a new area and there's not family there, or there's not friends there, that can make that even 10 times more complicated.
Like you gotta find your people.
Yeah. You gotta find people that are like going to be there for you, going to encourage you, help you move,
solid in their faith,
help you put new furniture together.
Yeah.
That's that's a good person if they'll come over and do that, and the willingness in their hearts to just help and serve
and then be
there.
really solid in wisdom and the Lord to give hopeful encouragement.
Not like, oh man, y'all are crazy. Not like this constantly making you feel even more so of what you already feel.
Yeah.
That's not, the best environment to be in those seasons. So we definitely had really encouraging friends.
We also somehow, which we talked about this in another episode, found a way to have time together. We got away a lot in the middle of that.
Well, and we were, again, newly married. Just throw that one in there too. They say the hardest year of marriage is the first and second year of marriage, right? So it's like communications. We're learning how to actually
love one another.
Yeah, together in the midst of all the crazy things that we're changing. And, so you're dealing with that on top of all the other things. It's like, oh, am I giving her what she needs? Is she giving me what I need? Are we even communicating our needs properly? Are we frustrated with one another? Like there was just always something that you had to navigate. But one of the things I think we did do well is we did try our best to get time together. I think we did our best to find time to communicate with the kids and find out where their hearts were.
Yeah.
Family meetings or family time.
And just letting them talk like on the fly in the car at breakfast. Yeah.
And because you can only imagine, my daughter's now 7. Our youngest boy is 8 and our oldest boy is 20, which is wild. And, we have all these age differences. We got 11, 17. So that's all of them, which is, a very big age gap. And, they're going to have thoughts. They've walked through a lot of change. Adeline my daughter, she'll be like, oh, hey, what happened to my mom? Or where's she at? Or what's heaven like? Or these questions that just, kids just think, they pop in their mind. And through that, navigating how to just allow that to be okay.
Yes.
And let them feel like, hey, this thought isn't a bad thought. This is okay. Like, this is normal. We can talk. Yeah. It's going to... For adults that carry more emotions, that carry more pain, and there's maybe more things attached to it, it can sting a little bit. It can kind of feel like, whoa, that just went right through my chest. Yeah. And I kind of lost my breath for a minute.
Right.
But I'm not going to show that because I don't want them to be afraid. So I think we've done really well to allow them to express so they can feel comfortable in these transitions. They can feel like it's okay that they're having thoughts and feelings, and they can express it, because if we need to, kids do too. Right. I think that's a common misunderstanding that parents have with their children, is that they're they don't need,
they are resilient, but they need to talk.
They need to feel understood. They need to feel loved. One of the things I've learned as a father is how to make my sons and daughters feel understood while giving direction. Because just because they want to feel understood doesn't mean everything they're doing is right. That's the problem. And I think as parents, we tend to lash out of the wrongdoing, and then the kid just feels misunderstood and hurt by you, which is just, all kinds of stuff there. But
we also went to counseling separately. That was one thing we did.
We did do that, yeah.
Like maybe 6 months.
Yeah. I think you did more than me.
I did, yeah. We found a really good Spirit-filled.
Yeah, and he was just really good at kind of helping you understand who you were. I think his job was really just creating awareness.
Yes.
Not only in yourself, but in your spouse, and kind of helping you navigate their needs. Because I know if anyone's walked through a relationship or a marriage, one of the things you begin to realize is do I even know that other person's needs? do I actually know them? Like, I may think I know them, but do I actually know, and am I satisfying them to where they feel loved by me? Because I could maybe say, well, I do the dishes, or I help her do laundry, or I'll do this, but does that even do anything? I did a lot of things early on thinking that, man, she's going to love me for this. And, I didn't actually do anything for her.
I wanted to talk.
She wanted to talk, but I was spending all the time serving her and not talking to her.
Which is still needed.
Which is still, yes, I'm not saying don't do things, but I'm just saying I wasn't even aware that she wasn't feeling loved by all the things I was serving her in, and realized she actually just needed time with me. And I'm almost confused by it because I wish that was done for me in my mind, because but that's the problem that you have in a relationship. So I think that counseling did give us a lot of awareness into those areas.
And I didn't always like going. I almost hated going and was probably anxious for 24 hours before I went there, because you're going to face pain, you're going to deal with all the junk, and I would like to avoid that. But so we did that. That's a big thing. I think there's a stigma attached to that, seeing a therapist sometimes.
And I will say to that stigma, it's because there's probably been not always the best therapists or not always the best counselors.
Right.
You definitely need to make sure you're seeing the right person.
Right. But there are good ones out there.
There are good ones out there. And I won't say that everyone is going to just give you a great feeling and help you.
And then I knew when it needed to end. Yeah. We knew when, we saw him for a while.
More so, our season's changing. I think we walked through. We didn't have any, I think our first year, our kids didn't really do any activities.
Yes, that's a big thing.
That was a big thing because we just needed to figure out how to blend, to be honest.
Yes.
So the thought of soccer or baseball or basketball or gymnastics or ballerina, whatever.
You got to know the season you're in.
Yep. And we were really careful, but we also then realized that our kids want to do things.
Yeah, so when the time was right, we did.
We did. And that was one thing that I think we did navigate well, because I imagine if we would have just dived right into what would be a quote-unquote normal family,
sign everybody
up, we probably would have struggled a lot longer.
And we wouldn't have had the conversations that we had.
And the kids wouldn't have been able to express, because they would have been so busy too and distracted by their activities and things. So that's a good one. That's something that I think we've really thought about. But to kind of put a bow on a lot of this conversation, and one thing to really think about, I think for me, being able to find rest in the midst of all of that. I don't know about anybody else out there, but when you're going through a lot of stress, does anyone sleep well? I mean, come on. Like, I think that's what everyone's problem is. You toss and turn.
Yeah.
You're having bad dreams. You wake up 15 times, or you wake up wide awake at 3 a.m. and you can't go back to sleep. You feel tense.
Yes.
You may have back problems, neck problems. You've changed every pillow. You've gotten a new mattress. And you're like, what's wrong with me, And it's stress. It's stress. It's just not being able to cope.
Not dealt with
stress. Not being able to cope and not be able to rest in the midst of craziness. And getting to that, everyone's like, oh, what's the answer? What's the answer? And the answer is actually not easy. That's the problem. If it was an easy button, I think we would not have these issues. But to get through heavy seasons and stressful events in life, you got to do the work.
Yeah.
And the work is all the things that are above. It's finding time to express what's going on, become aware of what you're dealing with and what you're doing. Like, am I handling this right? Am I handling it bad? Ask people around you. If you don't have close friends that can't be honest with you, you probably don't have close friends. If your spouse or your family can't communicate things to you that are unhealthy, that they're saying, you're probably in a bad place, and it's going to be hard for you to ever get better. So for me, it's like, I would allow people to speak into my life and be honest with me. And it doesn't always feel great to hear things. You're like biting your tongue a little bit. Like, all right, okay, all right. And take that. And then I think the next big step to finding rest is really just allowing yourself to be okay with the season you're in and saying,
yes.
And then this is the thing, we are very trusting in the Lord. We have very strong relationships with God. And for us, it's knowing that like we're not going to be able to do this alone. Like we have somebody, we have the Lord who's going to like lead us through this. God's going to give us a way. He's going to show us a way. We have to trust him, because if I'm going to sit here and think that I, who've never walked through any of this, is just going to have an answer for all of it, like miraculously, and get through it, that's almost like, that's the crazy thing. And so many people try to do that, and so many people fail. So I think for us, it's just trusting the Lord, trusting the Spirit, and knowing that like, I can sit here and stress about this all night, or I can say, God, I'm giving this to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to sleep tonight. I'm going to believe that everything's in your hands, and then I can find rest in that, because it's not up to me now. I can trust in the Lord, and the Lord gives a lot of promises of how he's going to provide for his children. We're his children. So, and I know one thing that you said, what was that quote? Someone said,
it's Bill Johnson, you only have authority over the storms that you can sleep in.
Yeah, that's probably the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, because that's so true. That's from the story in the Bible where Jesus was sleeping on the ship. And
the
disciples,
boat is about to be overtaken by a storm.
Yeah, it's a back storm coming in. The disciples were in the boat with Jesus, and they're supposed to go to the other side. He told them, we're going to the other side.
Water's coming in. They should be drowning. Yeah.
And he's sleeping through the whole thing. No worries. And they're dumbfounded by the fact that he's asleep. Like, how is this? Does he even care about our lives? That's what they're thinking. That's what they're saying. And they wake him up, and he's just not even like, what's wrong?
It was his awareness that, okay, so he gave grace, I believe, because giving myself grace, we all the time say like, God gives so much grace, you have grace from God, but are we giving ourselves grace? And what that looks like is saying, my Father's going to take care of this. I'm actually not capable of doing it, but if I let him do it in me, I'm capable, so I go to sleep.
Yeah. And in that, long story short, and you should go read this story in the New Testament. But basically, Jesus, gets up after them waking him up. And then he basically says, guys, what's your problem? Don't you realize that, I commanded this, y'all, we're going to go to the other side. So he gets up, he looks at the storm, and commands it to stop, and it settles immediately. And they're just like, first of all, shocked by what he keeps doing, right? Miracles. And he just calms the storm. And it was just, he was peaceful the whole time about it. Like, this wasn't a concern. He wasn't worried about no storm. Like, he's like, this is fun. I know my Father told me we're going to the other side. So we're going to the other side. And for me, if it's like, if I feel like the Lord's like, you're going to get through this, and this season I'm going to walk you through, and you're going to get to the other side. If I don't believe that, then I'm going to be restless. I can't rest in that. But if I can say, God, I believe you. We're going to the other side. This season may be really hard. This life change may be super stressful. But I know you told me we're going to the other side, and you're going to do things in me. And if I believe that, I can rest because he's going to do it in me. But if I don't believe that, that's where I'm falling short. And that may not be the answer anyone wants from this podcast, but the truth of the matter, that's really where the truth lies. Yeah.
And then I'll say one more quote that was from Havilah Cunnington that I heard that kept me in a lot of the seasons, that if we believe God in his truths and who he is the great gardener, and he is in charge of time and seasons, then the season is going to change. Like, seasons inevitably have to change. Winter cannot last forever. So.
Yeah, that's good. Well, hope you guys stay encouraged through that. And if, you're walking through a stressful life thing right now, if you're walking through or going through something, or feel like you're about to go, maybe you're about to get married, get engaged. I mean, the whole list of the things you could Google that may be stressful. I would ask yourself those three things that we just talked about, which is, are you giving yourself time to process what's happening? That could be grief. That could be just marriage counseling. It could be a million things of what it is.
What it looks like.
Are you taking time that you're thinking about what's happening and processing it? So number 2, are you aware of what's going on in you? Because if you aren't I mean, it's hard to even take time for yourself if you're not aware. So number 2, are you aware of what's going on? Are you thinking about it? Are you reflecting? Are you doing things that create awareness for what's happening in the situation?
Mm-hmm.
And then are you trusting the Lord?
Yeah.
And if you can't do those 3 things, it's going to be a lot harder to walk through a stressful season in life.
But if you do those, we are evidence that you can come out the other side.
Yeah. And you don't even have to do it perfectly.
Yeah, because we didn't.
I can very, very much say we could have a whole podcast episode.
Yeah.
Probably a whole season of just things we haven't done right.
Right. But the peace.
Is yeah. And the rest and trusting in the Lord, because
and the fruit that comes from that.
Because we're human beings, and if we are the ones in charge of every single decision that we make outside of God, it's going to be a messy ride.
Yep.
So that's all we got for you guys this time. Thanks for listening, and tune in for more.
You can find us on Instagram at blended_podcast.
Y'all have a blessed day.
Bye.